So that's where I'm reading from. An act was passed to chastise happiness. Laughter and pleasure were banned as deadly sins. A questionless mind was ranked as wise content. A dull heart's silent apathy as peace. Sleep was not there. Torpor was the sole rest. Death came, but neither respite gave nor end. Always the soul lived on and suffered more. Ever he deeper probed that kingdom of pain. Around him grew the terror of a world of agony followed by worse agony. And in the terror, a great wicked joy, glad of one's own and others' calamity. There, thought and life were a long punishment. The breath a burden, and all hope a scourge. The body a field of torment, amassed unease. Repose was awaiting between pang and pang. This was the law of things none dreamed to change. A hard, somber heart, a harsh, unsmiling mind, rejected happiness like a cloying sweet. Tranquility was a tedium and ennui. Only by suffering life grew colorful. It needed the spice of pain, the salt of tears. If one could cease to be, all would be well. Else, only fierce sensations gave some zest. A fury of jealousy burning the gnawed heart. The sting of murderous spite and hate and lust. The whisper that lures to the pit and treachery's stroke through vivid spots on the dull, aching hours. To watch the drama of infelicity, the writhing of creatures under the harrow of doom, and sorrow's tragic gaze into the night, and horror and the hammering heart of fear were the ingredients in time's heavy cup that pleased and helped to enjoy its bitter taste. Of such fierce stuff was made up life's long hell. These were the threads of the dark spider's web in which the soul was caught, quivering and wrapped. This was religion. This was nature's rule. In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black, pitiless image of power, kneeling one must cross hard-hearted stony courts, a pavement like a floor of evil fate. Each stone was a keen edge of ruthless force, and glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts. The dry, gnarled trees stood up like dying men, stiffened into a pose of agony. And from each window peered an ominous priest, chanting Te Deums for slaughter's crowning grace. Uprooted cities, blasted human homes, burned writhen bodies, the bombshells massacre. We should be happy when we reach the end of this, no? Dana.
An act was passed to chastise happiness. Laughter and pressure were banned as deadly sins. A questionless mind was ranked as wise content. A dull heart's silent apathy as peace. Sleep was not gained, torpor was the soul rest. Death came, but neither respite gave nor gained. Always the soul lived on and suffered more.
So this is really hell. No? A place where happiness is punished. By law it's punished. A law, an act was passed to chastise, to punish happiness. Laughter and pleasure were banned as deadly sins. I don't know whether any of you have read that famous book of George Orwell, 1984. No? He describes a world like this, no? And it's very noticeable. He points out that all forms of happiness or relief were discouraged, punished.
You remember which book? In the book when George Orwell?
1984.
Sorry?
1984.
Yes, but not this, but the title of the book.
The title of the book is 1984
Oh, 1984.
by George Orwell. I'm not really encouraging you to read it, 𝐺𝐵𝐿aक्shmi. It's really a terrible book. I mean, it's a great book. It's important that he wrote it, but it's not really much fun to read.
Okay, thank you.
So, if you didn't question, if you just accepted, a questionless mind was ranked as wise content. It's just wise to not ask any questions, remain satisfied with things the way they are, don't stir anything up. And a silent apathy. Apathy is really a kind of despair. When you've accepted, you think you can't change anything, and you just feel, I can't give any attention to this. A dull heart's silent apathy is reckoned as peace. It's very far, really, from true peace. And in that dreadful world, even sleep, true healing sleep, was not there. The only rest the beings get is a kind of torpor. Torpor is a state, an almost drugged state, a state of lethargy in which you can't move. And in that world, death does come, but it doesn't give any respite, it doesn't lead to any happier state, it doesn't lead to any end. The soul has to live on, and it suffers more and more. Tara.
Ever he deeper probed that kingdom of pain. Around him grew the terror of a world, of agony, followed by worse agony. And in the terror, a great wicked joy, glad of one's own and others' calamity.
Yes. So Asvapati is trying to find the source of all this. So he's probing, going deeper and deeper into it. So he's probing this kingdom of pain, trying to find out more about him. So he feels growing around him the terror, the feeling, the sense of intense fear of a world which is full of agony, of intense suffering. And one agony is only followed by another, worse agony. But what makes it even worse in this world is that in that terror of pain, there's something like, he says, a great wicked joy. There's something which is enjoying all that suffering. Something that's glad even of your own suffering and others' calamity. And calamity is disaster. Do you want to read? Line two, page 227, the last line. Would you start reading there? Yes, if you wish. Would you like to read? Yeah.
Death, thought, and life were a long punishment.
Go on.
The breath a burden, and all hope a scourge. Scourge. The body a field of torment, a masked unease. Repose was a waiting between pain and back.
Yes. Do you know what all these words mean? A scourge. It's like a whip with many lashes. A scourge. So it's again a form of punishment. A field of torment. Again, it's suffering, intense suffering. And everything is uneasy there. There's no sense of rest or relaxation. Everything is tense, massed unease. We long for rest. We need rest. But there, the only kind of rest is a kind of waiting between one pain, one torment, and another one. Do you want to read? So start with this line 283. This was the law.
This was the law of things. Man dreamed change. A heart somber heart. A harsh, unsmiling mind. rejected happiness like a hollow sweet.
Yes. Next line.
Tranquility.
Tranquility.
Tranquility was a
Tedium. Yes.
tedium and
This is not fair. This is a French word. Ennui. So.
Only by suffering life grew colorful. It needed the spice of pain, the salt of tears.
Let's pause there. There's a full stop. No? So all this suffering was the law of things. And the beings who are living in that realm, they don't dream of changing anything. It's as if the heart has to become hardened, somber, dark. The mind has to forget all about smiling, happiness, relaxation. The heart and the mind have to reject happiness. No happiness allowed. Happiness is like a cloying sweet, a sweet that is too sweet. You don't want to eat it after some time. It's too sweet and it's too sticky. So for those beings there, only by suffering, life grew colorful, interesting, no? It needed spice and salt, the spice of pain, the salt of tears. Tranquility. Tranquility was a tedium and ennui. Tedium is boring, something that's a tedious job. It's very boring. Tedium, it's the feeling of being bored. So normally tranquility is something that we value very much. Peace, no? Quiet. Yeah. But for them, it's something boring. And that's the meaning of this French word, ennui. It's boring and troublesome. Only by suffering, their life grew colorful. So like with food, it needs some spice, some salt. Will you read?
If one could cease to be, all would be well. Else only fierce sensation gave some zest. A fury of jealousy burning the gaunt.
Gnawed. The G is silent or almost silent.
Now, gnawed heart, the sting of murder's spite and hate and lust, the whisper that lures to the pit and treachery stroke through vivid spot on the dull etching hours.
Yes, thank you. So people or the beings there, they long for everything to stop, or for themselves to cease to be. That would be well, that would be good. But since that's not possible, since they can't cease to be, they only fierce sensations give some kind of taste to life, zest. It gives a little bit of enthusiasm. If we are cooking and we want to liven it up, we may squeeze some lemon juice into it or put some spice. Only fierce sensations gave some zest. And then he gives examples of what those fierce sensations could be. If you feel intensely jealous, a fury of jealousy, which is burning up your heart as if something is eating it, chewing it up, to gnaw. Dogs gnaw on bones. The heart gets gnawed. It's a kind of fierce sensation where the feeling of jealousy is eating you up. Or the sting of murderous spite. If you want to do something bad to somebody and you get fun out of causing him pain and trouble. Spite. We sometimes say that a person is spiteful. They do things just to be mean. No? Then the sting of murderous spite and hate and lust. These are these fierce sensations. And another example that he gives is treachery. The whisper. You might whisper in a friendly way to somebody, but you're really just luring him into a trap, to the pit. Or you're going to betray him. You pretend to be a friend, but really you're leading him into some very bad situation. Treachery stroke. So these kind of things, this murderous spite and this treachery, these are the things that throw vivid spots on the hours which are so dull and boring unless there are these fierce sensations. Lela, now you go ahead.
Watch the drama of infelicity, the writhing of creatures under the harrow of doom, and sorrow's tragic gaze into the night, and horror, and the hammering heart of fear, were the ingredients in time's heavy cup that pleased and helped to enjoy its bitter taste. Of such fierce stuff was made up life's long hell.
Thank you. Yes. So these are some more things that liven things up. Watching the drama of infelicity, of unhappiness, of suffering, other people's suffering. Watching creatures writhing under the harrow of doom. A harrow is part of a plough. It's the part that cuts into the earth. And of course, when the farmer cuts into the earth like that, there may be worms, and the worms may get damaged by the harrow. No? So it can happen to people also. It's as if they are just, the plough is driving over them and cutting them up in pieces. Then they writhe, they move in pain like the worms. No? So for some perverted people, that is exciting to watch the writhing of creatures under the harrow of doom, of misfortune. And then the tragic gaze of sorrow into the night, sorrow that can't be comforted. And horror, there's some feeling that makes our whole being, our whole body revolt and withdraw. Horror. And the hammering heart of fear. You have the feeling that something very, very bad is going to happen to you. The heart starts beating uncontrollably. These fierce sensations were the ingredients. They're mixed into an awful kind of cocktail. Time's heavy cup. These sensations are the ingredients that pleased, that gave some kind of perverted delight, helped to enjoy the bitter taste of the passage of time. Of such fierce stuff was made up life's long hell, a terrible experience of that realm. Gangalakshmi.
These were threads of
Threads. These were the threads.
threads of the dark spider's web, in which the soul was caught, quivering and wrapped. This was religion. This was nature's religion.
So the spider's web. We know how spiders make a web and catch their prey and wrap them up and keep them there, eat them gradually. There's like a dark spider's web in which the poor soul gets caught. And then if it's in a spider's web, it moves and the web moves, then the spider comes and eats it. And this fierce stuff, he says, it's two things. It's religion in that place, that is to say that this is, you could say, some kind of higher rule, and it's also the rule of nature, what is natural. So then he gives us a dreadful kind of picture of a kind of religion. Joel, would you read?
In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black pitiless image of power, kneeling one must cross hard-hearted stony courts, a pavement like a floor of evil fate. Each stone was a keen edge of ruthless force, and glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts. The dry, gnarled trees stood up like dying men, stiffened into a pose of agony, and from each window peered an ominous priest, chanting Te Deums for slaughter's crowning grace. Uprooted cities, blasted human homes, burned writhen bodies, the bombshells massacred.
We had this word fell before. It means dreadful. There's a kind of chapel, a place of worship of a kind. But this is worshipping iniquity, evil. It's as if the beings have to worship. There's this black, pitiless image of power. They are supposed to worship it. In order to worship, they have to cross stony courtyards, plazas, on their knees, kneeling. One must cross these stony courts. There are worshippers who do these kind of things. No? Either they prostrate themselves, or they go kneeling or barefoot. No? So, but this pavement where they have to cross, it's so terrible. It's like a floor of evil fate. Each stone is a keen edge, a sharp edge of ruthless force, pitiless force. And it's covered with blood, glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts. And if perhaps there's a tree there, it's a dried up, gnarled tree. Trees that have grown in very unfavorable conditions. They grow in a very twisted way, and we can see that many of their branches have been damaged and broken off, and there are kind of lumps and bumps. A gnarled tree. So the poet says, these trees stand up and they look like the corpses of men that have been tortured into these positions. And somebody's watching. The courtyard is there, the worshippers are crossing on their knees, and there are many windows, and from the windows these priests are watching. Ominous priests. Their presence is scary, threatening. They are singing. The Te Deum is a sacred song. It means you, God. It's addressed to God. Here, these Te Deums are worshipping a God and offering him slaughter, the destruction of many beings. Slaughter as crowning grace. And it's a picture of a world war, no? Uprooted cities, blasted human homes, the poor bodies that have died by burning, they are writhing because of the agony that was felt. And the bombshells massacre, killing and destroying so much. So those priests are chanting. Rani.
Our enemies are fallen, they sang. All who once stayed our will are smitten and dead. How great we are, how merciful art thou. Thus thought they to reach God's impassive throne, and him command, whom all their acts opposed, magnifying their deeds to touch his skies, and make him an accomplice of their crimes.
So we have seen in history things like this happening in the name of religion. What terrible things have been done and what suffering has been inflicted. And those ominous priests think that they are actually worshipping God like that, making him partly guilty for their crimes. Kamla, I think you didn't read yet.
There no relenting pity would have grace, but ruthless strength and iron moods had way.
Sway. Sway means to rule. Sway.
A deathless serenity of terror and glory. This looked the figure of a darkened God, revered by the racket, radness he had made, who held in pride a miserable world, and helpless hearts narrow to unceasing woe, adored the feet that trampled down into the mirror. It was a world of sorrow and of hate. Sorrow with the hatter for its lonely joy, hatred with others, sorrow as it fears, a bitter ritual curled the suffering mouth, the tragic poverty saw its ominous chance.
Thank you. So in that world, there's nothing like pity. Nobody feels sorry for what is happening. Relenting is when you do things and then you feel sorry. There's no room for that or for pity. Only ruthless strength that has no pity. And iron moods, hard, cruel moods. These are the only things that are ruling to hold sway. It's what a king does. This is going on forever. a dateless sovereignty. This rule is going on and on without any end. This rule of terror, intense fear and gloom, misery, unhappiness. So this sway, this rule took the figure of a darkened God who's being revered, he's being worshipped by all this painful wretchedness that he has made, who's holding in thrall, who's keeping captive a miserable world. And there in that world, helpless hearts, nailed, like being nailed on the cross, to unceasing woe, endless suffering, are worshipping, adoring the feet that are just trampling them into the mud. It was a world of sorrow and of hate. Sorrow with hatred for its lonely joy. The only kind of enjoyment they get is the thrill of hating somebody or something. And hatred with others' sorrow as its feast. Some enjoyment from the suffering of others. A bitter rictus curled the suffering mouth. A rictus, we have come across this word before in a similar context. A rictus is a kind of spasm of the nerves or muscles of the face, which twists it into a kind of smile. But it's not a smile at all, it's a grimace. A bitter rictus curled the suffering mouth. It may look like a kind of laugh, but it isn't. A tragic cruelty saw its ominous chance. It sees its opportunity to cause more suffering.
Hate was the black archangel of that realm. It glowed, a somber jewel in the heart, burned the soul with its malignant rays. Wallowed in its fell abysm of might. These passions, even objects, seemed to exude. For mind overflowed into the inanimate. That answered with the wickedness it received. Against their users, used malignant powers, hurt without hands, and strangely, suddenly slew, appointed as instruments of an unseen doom. Or they made themselves a faithful prison wall, where men condemned wake through the creeping hours, counted by the tollings of an ominous bell, An evil environment worsened evil souls. All things were conscious there, and all perverse.
Thank you. So an archangel, usually an archangel should be a messenger of divine compassion and illumination. But in that realm, hate is the power, strong power, the black archangel of that realm. Hate is the opposite of love, or the perverted form of love. So just like love may glow in the heart, that hate is glowing a somber jewel, a dark jewel in the heart, which is actually burning the soul with its malignant rays. Something that is malignant is causing harm. So that hate wallows. This word we've come across rather often. It's a word we use for pigs and hippopotamuses, that they will enjoy rolling in the sticky mud. Elephants do it too. They cover themselves with that mud. They wallow. So here it is the hatred that is wallowing in this terrible, this fell abysm of might, of power. And these passions, this hatred, this treachery, all these things, even objects seem to exude, to breathe these feelings. For mind overflowed into the inanimate. In certain circumstances, this can happen, where there's a very strong atmosphere. The objects absorb it. And in this case, in this terrible realm, even the objects are breathing these terrible passions, because the power of mind overflowed into the inanimate. What is inanimate is not alive, no? Chairs and cups and so on. But the inanimate things respond to the wickedness that they receive from their environment. So these objects, of course, they're meant to be used by beings, by people. But these objects turned against the people who used them. With malignant powers, they do harm. They hurt without hands, and strangely, suddenly killed. It's as if something from behind, from mind, is using them as instruments of an unseen doom, some disasters. Or the objects themselves, they create a kind of prison around, where men condemned, it's like a prison. They can't sleep, those beings. They wake through the creeping hours. The passing of the hours is marked by the tollings, the ringing of a threatening bell. An evil environment worsened evil souls. I think this is often what happens in prisons. People they commit some crime, small or big, then they're sent to prison, and the environment there is so terrible it makes them even more criminal than they were. Especially this is so in this deep realm of falsehood. All things were conscious there, and all perverse, twisted, deformed.
What means slew?
Slew. To slay means to kill. And this is the past participle, past tense. So Asvapati continues. He dares to press on. There's one more whole page about it. And then in the middle of page 231, he reaches the bottom, the very bottom. And there something changes in the middle of page 231. So we might reach that point next week. An act was passed to chastise happiness. Laughter and pleasure were banned as deadly sins. A questionless mind was ranked as wise content. A dull heart's silent apathy as peace. Sleep was not there, torpor was the sole rest. Death came, but neither respite gave nor end. Always the soul lived on and suffered more. Ever he deeper probed that kingdom of pain. Around him grew the terror of a world of agony followed by worse agony, and in the terror a great wicked joy, glad of one's own and others' calamity. There thought and life were a long punishment, the breath a burden, and all hope a scourge, the body a field of torment, a massed unease. Repose was a waiting between pang and pang. This was the law of things none dreamed to change. A hard, sombre heart, a harsh, unsmiling mind rejected happiness like a cloying sweet. Tranquility was a tedium and ennui. Only by suffering life grew colourful. It needed the spice of pain, the salt of tears. If one could cease to be, all would be well. Else only fierce sensations gave some zest. A fury of jealousy burning the gnawed heart, the sting of murderous spite and hate and lust, the whisper that lures to the pit, and treachery's stroke through vivid spots on the dull, aching hours. To watch the drama of infelicity, the writhing of creatures under the harrow of doom, and sorrow's tragic gaze into the night, and horror, and the hammering heart of fear were the ingredients in time's heavy cup that pleased and helped to enjoy its bitter taste. Of such fierce stuff was made up life's long hell. These were the threads of the dark spider's web in which the soul was caught, quivering and wrapped. This was religion. This was nature's rule. In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black, pitiless image of power, kneeling, one must cross hard-hearted stony courts, a pavement like a floor of evil fate. Each stone was a keen edge of ruthless force, and glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts. The dry, gnarled trees stood up like dying men, stiffened into a pose of agony. And from each window peered an ominous priest, chanting Te Deums for slaughter's crowning grace. Uprooted cities, blasted human homes, burned writhen bodies, the bombshells massacre. Our enemies are fallen, they sang. All who once stayed our will are smitten and dead. How great we are, how merciful art thou. Thus thought they to reach God's impassive throne, and him command whom all their acts opposed, magnifying their deeds to touch his skies and make him an accomplice of their crimes. There no relenting pity could have place, but ruthless strength and iron moods had sway, a dateless sovereignty of terror and gloom. This took the figure of a darkened God, revered by the racked wretchedness he had made, who held in thrall a miserable world, and helpless hearts nailed to unceasing woe adored the feet that trampled them into mire. It was a world of sorrow and of hate. Sorrow with hatred for its lonely joy, hatred with others' sorrow as its feast. A bitter rictus curled the suffering mouth. A tragic cruelty saw its ominous chance. Hate was the black archangel of that realm. It glowed a sombre jewel in the heart, burning the soul with its malignant rays, and wallowed in its fell abysm of might. These passions even objects seemed to exude, for mind overflowed into the inanimate that answered with the wickedness it received. Against their users, used malignant powers, hurt without hands, and strangely, suddenly slew, appointed as instruments of an unseen doom. Or they made themselves a fateful prison wall, where men condemned wake through the creeping hours, counted by the tollings of an ominous bell. An evil environment worsened evil souls. All things were conscious there, and all perverse.